music of Captain Glenn Miller and the Army Air Force Band in 1944. I'm Guy Barker, and in the last programme of our series, we look at some of the consequences of this ban, both long-term and short-term.
Oh, fall in, fall out, dress right, dress ready front, at ease. What's easy about it? That's what I want to know. I can't. This is the G.I. Jive, man alive. It starts with the bugle blowing reveille over your bed. When you arrive, Jack, that's the G.I. Jive. Roodity-toot, jump in your suit, make a salute.
Johnny Mercer's song G.I. Jive, sung by the AAF band's drummer, Sergeant Ray McKinley. Whereas he was acting the part of a reluctant serviceman, it's clear that Glenn Miller himself, even when reading a prepared script, was more dedicated to his role.
One of the greatest supplies of ammunition with which our nation is fighting this war is a plentiful supply of good, old-fashioned faith. Faith in our purpose, and faith in the kind of guy who climbs into the tiny caboose of a high-flying fortress to shoot it out with the Jap and German flyers. Those are the boys we salute, the tail-end Charlies.
The Army Air Force Band with Tail End Charlie, written for them by Bill Finnegan, who actually turned down the chance to work full-time with Miller's outfit because he wanted to be a pilot. There were no new hit records for this band for the simple reason that no new record sessions were made during its existence. It was only several years later that some of its broadcasts were used for bootleg albums and eventually for officially sanctioned releases. When the band was posted to England and rechristened the American Band of the Allied Expeditionary Force, it certainly made an impact on local radio listeners. We'll hear from jazz writer Peter Vacher, followed by Lauren Schoenberg of the Harlem Jazz Museum, and first, broadcaster Helen Mayhew.
Because the music stems from wartime, that was a time of heightened emotions for everybody. People were living for the moment, nobody knew if tomorrow would come. And so the music that's associated with that time, and Miller really epitomises that, has a real significance for people.
The British audience participated in really quite an exceptional process. Daily, not just as we have it now, once in a while. This was almost overkill, you could argue. There was so much of it, and I think it seeped into the national consciousness.
It's hard for Americans to understand the tremendous significance of Miller to people in Europe during the Second World War, and the fact that he was in England, and the fact that they did travel around, and the fact that they did broadcast. And that meant a lot to a lot of people that fed a certain kind of reverence and a certain kind of love for the man and for his music that Goodman, Ellington, Basie, Thornhill never had, because they didn't go over there. They didn't chuck their commercial success.
The band, the string section, Johnny Desmond, the vocalist, all had enormous followings as a result of the very, very frequent broadcasts that they made. Within the band, there was this thing called the Swing Sextet, which later morphed into the Uptown Hall Gang. So you had both the full band with all of its impact, you know, the great numbers, In the Mood, American Patrol, Tuxedo Junction, but you also had this breakout band of swing, stars as it turned out, Mel Powell on piano, Peanuts Hucko on clarinet, Ray McKinley on drums. These were top men in their field. Here were real live American guys with that energy, with that drive, and I think that communicated. They went down to the Feldman Club, and there are famous accounts of Mel Powell and Hucko and McKinley being down at the Feldman Club. Today, of course, it's still there as the 100 Club, and sitting in with the guys. And I'm perfectly sure that the likes of Victor Feldman, then the young prodigy on drums, would have picked up from this, as possibly, almost certainly, Ronnie Scott would have done.
That 15-second fragment is all that's ever been released from an unofficial but historic recording of the British child prodigy, drummer Victor Feldman, sitting in with Miller's AEF band.
I once talked to Ronnie Scott about this, and he said, no, listen, he said, I was a kid coming up when the Miller Band was here, playing the saxophone, just getting into the business, and all of us who went to see that band, we couldn't believe it. We were gobsmacked by the precision and the drilled sections and sheer musicianship. It taught us all a lesson, and we tried to sort of keep that in mind. That's the level of musicianship you try to aspire to.
Trombonist Campbell Burnap. The broadcasts of the AEF band were done from their headquarters in Bedford at the Old Corn Exchange, referred to by the musicians as Lombardo Hall, in honour of Guy Lombardo, the king of musical corn. But there were also live appearances for audiences of servicemen, sometimes several in a day. It was a punishing schedule, as Glenn, now Major Miller, admitted in a BBC interview in September 1944.
In the month of August, for instance, we played 89 separate jobs. That includes 35 concerts at the bases and camps, as well as maintaining our regular broadcasting schedule.
Well, shouldn't think there's much time left for eating and sleeping.
Well, sometimes there isn't.
Rumour has it, Glenn, that you and your boys will soon be going overseas.
The sooner we have it, Vernon, the better we like it.
Have you enjoyed being here? I mean, in the few moments you found outside work?
The real enjoyment comes from the moments inside our work. Once we heard the happy sound of a music-hungry bunch of servicemen yelling for more whatever we had to offer, we knew that we could never enjoy a more satisfying payoff in our lives.
Starting in November 1944, an additional series of 6 radio shows were recorded as propaganda to be beamed towards potential listeners in Germany. Complete with announcements in English and German from presenter Ilse Weinberger and Glenn Miller himself, and songs by Sergeant Johnny Desmond, possibly the best vocalist ever with a Miller Band.
Jawohl, Herr Major, das war ein schmissiger Anfang. Da bekommt man direkt Lust, in so einem Soldatenauto, Jeep genannt, über Stock und Stein zu fahren.
This pleasure you may have, Elsa, und ich gebe Ihnen Sergeant Desmond als Chauffeur.
Feldwebel Desmond mit der romantischen Stimme? Den höre ich lieber singen.
Well, I don't blame you. Sergeant Desmond.
Here I am, sir.
Du bist der erste Kuss der Freude, der meinen Herzen Seligkeit bringt. Du bist der stille Wach des Abends, der Nacht schwingt, wenn ganz leis dann in Lied komme mir so hell und klein. Du bist ein Engel mir, so rein und fein.
He felt very strongly that great American music, as he saw it, should be made available to the American troops in great numbers abroad, and insisted, in fact, on getting nearer to the action, which is why, of course, he came to England. There were moves to keep the band, which was by then a large organisation, in America, but he wanted to be where the guys were, and they were in England. And, of course, the fateful flight to France was in preparation for transferring the band to Europe.
Peter Veitcher. By the time the last two pieces were recorded in December 1944, the band was preparing to move its operations to the newly liberated Paris, where the plan was to record a Christmas special with the American AEF band, plus contributions from London by the British AEF band under Sergeant George Mellacrino, and the Canadian AEF band directed by Captain Robert Farnan.
We were assembled at the London Casino, which was called the Queensbury Club then, and it was going to be a three-way link-up with Miller in Paris. And we were waiting for the word to go on the air, and we played almost all our books, and George Mellacrino had played all his program to the impatient audience. Then finally we received news about 9:30 that night that Miller just hadn't shown up. He was missing, and Jerry Gray, his arranger, was going to take over the orchestra conductor. And then I think we got on the air about 3 hours late. But it was a rather sad evening because we suspected the worst, you know, because most of us knew that Miller had flown across the channel with this friend of his, and anything could have happened in those days. And I must say we didn't have a great taste for playing that night. We were all feeling very depressed.
Major Glenn Miller, the well-known American band leader, is reported missing. He left England by air for Paris 9 days ago. Major Glenn Miller came over from the States early this year to direct the American band of the AEF, which has often been heard playing in the Allied Expeditionary Forces program of the BBC.
That BBC News bulletin was broadcast on Christmas Eve 1944, 9 days after Miller's documented departure in heavy weather from an airfield in Bedfordshire. For a long time it was believed that the weather alone was responsible for the aircraft being lost over the English Channel. But in recent decades, several alternative theories have proliferated concerning the fate of Major Glenn Miller.
This is all secondhand, but the people that I got it from were the guys in the band. And they said that Miller went ahead to France and was in a knife fight in a French brothel, was stabbed very badly, and was shipped back to the United States, where he died in a hospital in the United States, and is buried with his family in Iowa or wherever he was from. You would think there would be like a shrine there and people would go and visit it then, but the people who love Glenn Miller, they want to believe the myth. It's much better.
Arranger David Berger quoting what was believed by some members of the band. Other versions of the story that Miller actually met his death in Paris are based either on the rumour that he was involved in transactions on the black market, or even less likely, that he was a counter-espionage agent. On the other hand, his younger brother Herb, interviewed in 1982, felt that Glenn arranged his own disappearance for more personal reasons.
I think that he became very ill and subsequently died, I think, of cancer, because he was smoking one cigarette after another. He never let one go out. He had finished 90 shows in 30 days just before he left. So he could have been a nervous wreck. Now there's another thing that makes me think the whole thing's phony. The flight plan is laid out for Bordeaux, not Paris.